5 minutes for questions. Mr. Secretary, one of the emerging threats listed in the FSOC report is the possibility of destructive cyber attack. As I believe you recall, it wasn't 6 months ago that 7 Iranians linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard were indicted for a coordinated cyber attack on U.S. major financial institutions. Attorney General Loretta Lynch said at the time, quote, "These attacks were relentless, they were systematic, and they were widespread." So a couple of questions about the recent $1.7 billion in payments the administration recently made to Iran, payments that we now know were made in cash, made in secret, and $400 million of which we know coincided with the release of American hostages. Secretary Kerry, your fellow cabinet member, said of related sanctions relief under the JCPOA, quote, "I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps or other entities, some of which are labeled terrorist." So isn't it true, Mr. Secretary, that since the $1.7 billion was paid in cash, we have no way of tracing the money and you have no way of assuring us that it will not be used for terrorist purposes?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the payments that you're referring to were payments related to the Hague Tribunal settlement. President Obama—
I understand that, but the question is, can you trace it and can you guarantee us that it will not be used for terrorism?
We have laid out the facts related to this transfer in a letter sent to this committee. The payments complied with U.S. sanctions.
I understand that, Mr. Secretary, but it's a yes or no question. Can you guarantee us that it will not be used for terrorist purposes? Because I don't believe you can trace it.
Mr. Chairman, if you just give me a minute, I'll answer your question.
Well, if you would answer the question, I'd allow you to give you context.
In your question, characterized this incorrectly. It was not ransom. It was settlement of a contractual dispute.
I didn't use the word ransom, Mr. Secretary.
You did.
I said it no, I didn't. You could read the record. I said it coincided with the release of American hostages.
Now, you've asked a specific question about where the money goes. Where the payment went to the Central Bank of Iran. We do a lot of work to monitor what the support that Iran gives to terrorist organizations.
What I asked, Mr. Secretary, was could you trace the money? Can you trace the money?
We have not seen an increase in terrorist funding by Iran.
Okay, I think we'll move on, Mr. Secretary, because I'm not getting an answer. But I want to know, and we have pursued this line of questioning before, who authorized the cash payment? So we know that cash has been called the currency of terrorism. You have an entire office at Treasury devoted to terrorism and financial intelligence. According to press reports, senior officials at the Justice Department indicated objections. Did you object to the payment, or were you the one who authorized the cash payment?
Mr. Chairman, the President spoke clearly to the facts of this on January 17th. We've given you the details in a letter. This was a settlement of a contract claim where the United States government, the American taxpayer, was exposed to potentially $5 to $10 billion of additional damages.
Mr. Secretary, the question is, you're avoiding the question, who authorized the cash payment?
The method of payment is a technicality. The agreement to settle a contract dispute was a substantive issue.
It's not a technicality to those who are on the receiving end of Hezbollah missiles in Israel.
The payments were consistent with our sanctions laws. They were consistent.
Did you authorize the cash payment, yes or no?
The method of payment was worked through a process that we outlined in a letter that we provided to this committee. Okay,
Mr. Secretary, isn't it true under 31 U.S.C. 1304 you must personally certify payments for the judgment fund? So these funds could not have been released except on your signature.
Mr. Chairman, I'm telling you that the payments were properly made. I was aware of them. I was cognizant that it was happening. It was an appropriate settlement of a contract dispute that saved the American taxpayer billions of dollars.
Hey, if you won't tell us who authorized the cash payment, what we do know is on on multiple occasions, the administration said that you had no choice but to use cash. And in fact, your State Department spokesman on August 3rd said, quote, "It couldn't be done over wire transfers." The President himself on the very next day said, quote, "We could not wire the money." Yet a Treasury Department spokesman acknowledged that on at least 2 occasions, the U.S. did make payments via wire transfer on July 2015 or April 2016. So did Politico get it wrong? Did your spokesperson get it wrong? Or did the President get it wrong? Why were we misled?
Mr. Chairman, the President got it right. You weren't misled. The payments were made as
Were two wire transfers made, one in July 2015
Mr.
and
Chairman,
one
I'm
in
happy to
April
answer your
2016.
question, but you've got to stop interrupting me every time I start.
Well, if we would get answers, then I wouldn't have to interrupt. So,
I'm happy to answer your question, but you got to let me speak.
I'd like to listen.
All right. We have done a very effective job cutting Iran off from the international financial system. The payment that was made by wire to Iran was not for $1 billion, not for $1 million. It was for $900,000. It went to a foreign bank account that Iran had, and it was a difficult process to get the money, as it has been difficult for Iran to get access to its own money under the JCPOA because we've been so effective in isolating Iran from the international financial system.
So wire transfers were made, that is correct?
The method of payment is a technical detail. The agreement was that this settlement would go to the Central Bank of Iran. And it was done in a way that was consistent with the agreement.
You're confirming that at least two wire transfers went to Iran, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I'm telling you that before the transaction that we're discussing, the transfer we're discussing, one had gone, the other was subsequent. It was for $900,000, and it was a difficult process because, as it has been hard under the JPOA and the JCPOA, it has taken Iran a lot of time to get access to its own money that it's entitled to under the agreement.
Thank you,
I'm not
Mr.
saying.
Secretary.
I'm not saying.
I believe that the president did get it wrong.
No,
my time has expired.
That's totally incorrect.
The chair now
I just disagree with you,
recognizes
Mr.
the ranking member for 5 minutes.